Good evening, dear ladies and gentlemen. I would like to warmly welcome you to our event tonight, and I would like to warmly welcome our guest from Paris, Branko Aleksić, who will deliver his lecture, Freud's Free Association, applied by Breton to Surrealist Writing and Painting. On the one hand, this lecture is linked with our special exhibition, which is still on show until April, Surreal, Imagining New Realities. And on the other hand, Branko's lecture is also scheduled as our participation for the Vienna Art Week 2022. Our director Monika Pessler should have explained this cooperation and our thoughts about it, but unfortunately she fell ill, and so I will read an extract of what she has prepared to tell you about this. So I quote, "Every year the Vienna Art Week takes place under a special leitmotif. This year it is called Challenging Orders. You might ask yourself what the one title, Challenging Orders, has to do with the other, Surreal, Imagining New Realities. But at the second glance, it becomes clear. Challenging Orders relates to our current times, which are marked by crises, such as the pandemics, the Ukraine war, the energy crisis, not to mention the climate crisis. Imagining New Realities presents attempts of the last century of the interwar period that in many ways are similar to our present to solve such problems. The question of surrealism, the question of psychoanalysis, our question today is how we can create an absolute reality that holds out the prospect of self-determined life in peace and freedom in the fusion of inner and outer worlds of experience." End of the quote. And with these words, let me now turn to Branko Aleksić's lecture tonight. After my short introduction, the floor will be yours, Branko, and after the lecture and after the presentation of some PowerPoint pictures, you, the audience, will of course have the possibility to discuss with Branko Aleksić. Yeah, when we started to work on our exhibition project on surrealism, which consists of about 100 artworks from the Klevan collection, it was of course our aim and our aspiration to have a closer look to the relationship between Breton and Freud, between surrealism and psychoanalysis. How did Breton, but also his colleagues from the surrealist movement, Paul Éluard, Louis Aragon, René Crevel, Antonin Artaud, read and interpret Freud, their Denkmeister, the master of thoughts? How did they understand or misunderstand Freud? It became soon fascinating, and I confess for me also surprising to see that although Freud would say that he didn't understand surrealism, that there was more exchange between Freud and Breton than we thought, that there were more letters between them that we had thought, more books of Breton in Freud's library than we had thought. And there is also a very interesting way of Breton to deal with Freud's letters. As a matter of fact, Breton repeatedly published the letters he received by Freud in his books or in the Surrealist magazines. We can interpret this as a kind of wish for scientific legitimation and prestige, but no doubt, Breton's reprints of Freud letters and his works played a significant role in the dissemination of psychoanalytic ideas in France. And this makes me come to Branko Aleksić, a significant role, because in our research project, this significant role was also influenced by you, by one of your papers, a very clear and instructive paper which is entitled in French, Freud et les surréalistes, c'est fou intégral, which was edited in a French psychoanalytic magazines called Topic. And after this, we started to have a conversation by phone, by email, and you have been really very, very helpful in all the process, and I would like to thank you. And I'm very happy that you were able to came to Vienna. And let me tell you also this, I think that this is only the second lecture by a Paris-based researcher on Freud and Breton. The first one was in 1977 when Jean-Bertrand Pontalis delivered a really excellent lecture, which was then printed in the Sigmund Freud House Bulletin, which was called, and the lecture was of course in French, 1 second. Les vases non communicants, les malentendus Breton-Freud, so the misunderstandings between Freud and Breton. Let me now introduce our guest. Branko Aleksić is a writer, a poet, and an essayist based in Paris, as I already told you, and he is a member of the International Association of Interactions with Psychoanalysis. This association is also based in Paris. He was born in Belgrade in 1951, so in these times Yugoslavia, today Serbia. And he holds a Bachelor of Arts degree from the University of Belgrade, 1980, and a doctorate from the University Paris-Lit in 1992. He has written several comparative studies and edited several anthologies and collections of critical essays devoted to French and Serbian surrealism, which have been published in Belgrade and Paris. He has also edited a number of special issues devoted to Serbian surrealism and surrealists in general for numerous French magazines. Among other works on surrealism, let me mention 2 books on Dali and Max Ernst. The first one is Dali, Inédit de Belgrade 1932, so Dali, previously unpublished from Belgrade 1932, which contains 2 original manuscripts of Dali in French. And the other one is a poem drawing by Max Ernst, Première conversation mémorable avec la chimère, first memorable conversation with the chimera. It's a bilingual edition which came out in town in 1991. In 2004, he has edited a journal by Elisabeth Gebesco, who was in analysis, she was in control analysis with Lacan. So he edited this book, which is called Journal avec Lacan, Un amour de transfert, in 2004. Yes, let me now let you the floor. Thank you for your attention, and I'm really looking forward to the lecture tonight.
I'm very glad to be with you here, and we are all grateful to Monica Pessler and Daniela Finzi for this bringing Breton back to Bergerstrasse, because he was here 21, and what is left for us now to do after this exhibit, my imagining is that I bring you to the artist entrance. Let's see how Breton came actually to this experience, how he knocked to the Freud's door and why it happened. Freud, as you know, dealt with artist experience with Leonardo da Vinci in 1910. He did with Wilhelm Janssen Gradiva, beautiful essay that was translated in French by Princess Bonaparte, and one surrealist, Georges Sardou. He formulated this term of applied psychoanalysis, among other things, to the literature in his essay on 1913. And now, in return, there is somebody like Breton who will be interested to see what he can apply to the literature, and later we will mention also Salvador Dali, another one who knocked to the Bergstrasse but didn't meet Freud until exile in London and changed a little paradigm of Freud's understanding of surrealism. So my idea would be to to do this artist entrance under the sign of the Zwischen Reich that Freud formulates in 1913, and this go between two realms. Actually, as you will see, Breton mentions this in his cycle of automatical texts, solvable fish, yeah, poisson soluble. So this is idea. I will show you a few of the PowerPoints that has really to be powerful, because in this public selling of Breton's collection, there was big affair. His daughter wasn't satisfied with state offer of France to get the Breton's heritage to the museums, so she just organized a big public sale. It was in 1903, and there in catalogs there is 10 volumes of catalogs. All Breton's books are listed with reproductions, sometimes with dedication, and there were 3 or 4 Freud's letters that are previously unknown. First letter was this one from October, from Vienna. Breton is with Max Ernst, Tristan Tzara, he's in terror, he's on his wedding trip, and he writes to Freud a letter that we don't have, but I will say just what Freud said, that this is one of the most touching letters that he got in his whole life. So he answers to Breton and asks him to come to his, there is a small clumsy formulation in French, ma consultation. He wants to say, mon cabinet de consultation. And this is a letter that Breton filed in one of Freud's books. He has all editions of Freud's books published. But before that, before this reception of Freud, he was, as a student of medicine in 1916, during the war, he was in a psychiatrical department curing wounded military French who were sometimes having hallucinations. That, in a most interesting way, he compared to Fichte's transcendental philosophy. He said, I had this one of military wounded who was saying that everything is actually appearance. The bombs that are falling down are just appearance. And Breton says it's Fichte actually. And what I found later, there is one of, in Psyche, in a French, in a German review, in 83, 87, there was big polemics about really foundation of Freud's thought and how he came to psychoanalysis. Did he read Schopenhauer? Did he read Sleeps, etc.? And Odin Merkant said, actually, you take Fichte's philosophy of transcendental idealism and you deponentialize it, and you get psychoanalysis. So it's interesting that Freud is on the way that Breton, with his lucidity of young man, he's born in 1986, so in 1916 he's 20 years, and there he reads for the first time Freud. He reads him through French vulgarization. Freud is not still translated in French. This is what he says on the first appointment: France is at behind of my work. But Breton finds interest in following, above all, Freud's revolution. You will see the quotation, revolutionizing the point of dreams, sexual life, surrealists will admit this, and above all, this monologue of bounded military, of bounded people that had this sometimes monologue and that were talking the first thing that comes to your mind. This is idea that Breton will apply to surrealism. We don't know how. We don't know what is the click, how he came to the idea, but he took it. And in his notebooks, this is new, in '89, they published French edition of complete works of Breton. And what is new is his notebooks. Before he sees Freud, you can follow actually his discovery of the vein of psychoanalysis. And I will quote you at least 2 fragments from these notebooks. In my clumsy translation, later I will quote from the Manifesto of Surrealism. It is in Michigan Press in '69. But here is the notebook. In 21, before he sees Freud, he notes, Freud, disciple of Charcot, has revolutionized nowadays the mental medicine, while Babinski, also disciple of Charcot, revolutionized the nervous medicine. Babinski will play a role because he will put in the madness house Nadia, and Breton will publish his photo and this Babinski, but he doesn't know. For a moment he's admiring Babinski, but then it will, in 10 years, it will finish really bad with Babinski. I continue quotation from Breton. From their instruction at the hospital of Salpêtrière, Freud and Babinski kept this marvelous experimental method, which consists to try all that comes to your mind, to get rid from previous things that stay under the shelter of the shame forms. So this is note 4 from this notebook from 21. That spurred him to write to Freud a letter. In 21, when Breton says to him, come to my consultation cabinet, etc., Breton comes. He's still under impression of Dadaist experience. He's little insulting, he's little one of these people who are looking for interview of Professor Freud to come back to Paris in 22 and publish really texts that later he will be shameful, although he says here the surrealism should be out of the control of shame, etc. But he will be ashamed. In 53, in his interview with Radio France, he will regret this text that we published, interview of Professor Freud. Nevertheless, what interests me here is reliable testimony of Breton. When he says that Freud in conversation expressed his opinion, this is the most touching letter that I got. So, still there was something touching in Breton's preview and his approach to Freud. And we can believe him because this letter was not published, wasn't known. And at the beginning of interview of Professor Freud, he's quoting the letter actually in the same terms that we'll find in the letter, come to my consultation cabinet tomorrow, I'll see you in the afternoon, etc. So we can believe him. Later you will see, I will jump, but this is the same thing that happened with second testimony of second surrealist that came to see Freud, it's Salvador Dali, who will publish in 44 in his autobiography in States, testimony of my meeting with Freud, my sketching a skull at Freud. I was seeing that Freud was dying, etc. And nobody actually believed him until in 55, one American researcher, Flower Close, found the letter from Stefan Zweig to Freud that corroborated, that showed that Dali's testimony was real. And I will finish actually with this testimony of Dali. Now we are still Breton. Dali didn't show up on the scene of surrealist movement, and Breton will do this exchange with Freud until 37. This is a last card of Freud that he sent to Breton. I don't know the contents because in Carmel's catalog we have just a production of Graz. And Daniel was really wondering why Graz.
Yeah.
Freud wasn't specially, it's just a card that maybe he had a stock of cards. Anyway, the back of the card, we don't know the contents. But this is Anna Balakian who did The Road to the Absolute and did a study of Freud and Breton. She's quoting that Breton wrote to Freud. I don't know where she gets this. Breton wrote to Freud in 37, and probably this is invitation to participate to the inquiry on the dreams. But this is the last card of Freud, and in the Calmeldon catalog we have this letter. We have a few cards of Freud thanking Breton, sending him first manifesto of surrealism, sending him Nadia, sending him surrealism painting, and Bas Communicant will come to the conflict between two of them. I will now come to the first manifesto. What happened with Breton? He did something like René Descartes did. Descartes wrote his essay about meteors, about physical games, and then he said, I will write introduction. And introduction was Discours de la méthode. And finally, in few moments, we found already Freud's method. We will see method of Dali, paranoical critical method. We will see the invention of Rimbaud that Breton holds so much. I'm holding the system. And once you hold the system, maybe it's the end of the game in the poetry. But this thing with invention of automatical writing, as Breton calls it, produced actually a whole group, a movement of surrealism that was centered around Breton and around his cycle of automatical writing, Soluble Fish, that was actually first done, and then to argument and to show why his automatical drawing, he wrote the first manifesto of surrealism. And it's there that he clearly shows his link with Freud and inspiration, why he did Soluble Fish in that way. He says in First Manifesto, completely occupied, as I still was with Freud at that time, and familiar as I was with the methods of examination which I had some slight occasion to use on some patients during the war, his modest, I resolved to obtain from myself what we were trying to obtain from them, namely a monologue, spoken as rapidly as possible without any intervention of the part of the critical faculties, a monologue consequently unencumbered by the slightest inhibition, and which was as closely as possible akin to the spoken thought. So, this formulation is very, very rich in implication. Surrealists try to do as wounded people, as mad people, as insane people. They try to do, but this thing with putting a reason outside of the control or writing thought was most controversial actually proposal, because either you do it and you have dislocation of language, and this is really the person like a paranoid patient of Dr. Lacan, and when you see in Lacan's thesis of 32 quotation from her writings, this is a really writing without a control. But this is the insane person. In some of the texts of Antonin Artaud, you will find the same shutting out the reason. But in his ultimate impression of what happens with him, Antonin Artaud asks Jacques Rivière in Correspondence to pay attention and to permit him to express himself even when he's out of the reason. And maybe some of the Antonin Artaud, but after the Second World War, after he got the electroshock, maybe they expressed this really automatical writing. But nobody of Surrealists actually did it. Mm-hmm. The problem with Breton's Soluble Fish was, and it buried experience in '89, when they published his complete works. They showed that there is a second variant, then the third variant, and Marguerite Bonnet was showing me on the table, she didn't know what to do with it. Is she supposed to do just the variant, and Pléiade has 1,500 pages, this first volume, and it's something like you're coming to the impression of Proust of impulsive writing and correcting and filling up the notes with more pages than text itself has. But what it showed actually is that there is no real automatical writing with Breton, because what he did, the two variants, if you're doing really experiment, you can't have a variant. You have just one text. And there is one uninhibited testimony of Surrealist writer called Solomon Bully, who called him Moni de Bully in Paris. He's coming from Belgrade. He's bringing to Breton, I'll show you later, he's bringing a vampire, a translation of from Insane, one patient of Belgrade psychiatrical asylum that Breton will publish. It's a novel in pictures. And then as a reward, Breton wants to publish his automatical text. And there's Benjamin Perret, who in the house of Breton will go down to the floor and simulate barking dog, because he's in a trance of automatical writing. There are others, like Robert Desnos, that Breton admires. In Nadia, he says, Desnos, his pencil was flying, and it's something like a profound myth, esoterical myth. In Chinese mythology, you have this flying pencil. Jung wrote a study about it. But there is also a smuggling of writing in spite of the control of reason, so supposed to be shut down. And this Moni de Bully, at the end of his life, will explain in his memoirs how he was cheating Benjamin Perret, who was there to survey him and tell him, now you will write a real automatical text. Don't stop, don't think, just write. And Moni de Bully is writing, and at the same time, he's saying, I'm smuggling the thing. And he's actually, what he's doing, he will take the fairy tale, he will take the fragments just shattered from the language, everyday language, he will take the proverbs, etc. And we are in this go-between, in impossibility actually to do the automatical writing without good syntax. And everybody of them, all of Surrealists that are doing it, they're doing actually the very, very nice poetical text. And it lasts until Aragon publishes treatise on style, Traité de Style 28, when he says in very, very cold terms, there is no automatical writing if there is not a style, so it has to be well written. But then if it's well written, it's not really automatical writing. This is the problem, the whole problem with not misunderstanding Freud, but applying this monologue of really, really suffering persons and simulating their discourse. You can't do it except if it's just a literature. And actually, Breton and Eliard are doing Immaculée Conception, that is supposed to be a simulation of different states of insanity. And this is the last essay of Surrealists to do automatical writing. Breton, in one essay of automatical message, will say the history of automatical writing is continuously misfortune of writing. And he's actually right, because Breton tries to animate Freud to collaborate in surrealist adventure, and actually it works sometimes. Here you have this page of 27. La Révolution Surréaliste was launched as a review in 25. First pages are occupied by Giorgio de Chirico, but not the drawing and painting that you could admire here, but Chirico is a writer, and he's writing narration of dream, what happened in his dream. And it's very interesting, as in Moni de Bully, who is taking fairy tales, Chirico will come up to Pythagorean state, and he will simulate Pythagoras, memory of Pythagoras, metempsychosis of soul, etc. Revolution Surrealiste, until 25, does not admit Surrealist painting. In 24, in first Surrealist Manifesto, Breton precises, I'm writing for the poetical surrealism. So, whole manifesto is actually poetical surrealism. There is one appearance of Picasso, who is hunting in the castle of surrealism, but this is not Picasso painter, this is also Picasso who will try to write the poems. And there is controversial in 25. Max Morris talks vaguely about surrealist painting, and Pierre Neville, who is director of Surrealist Revolution Surrealiste, says in one text, nobody knows that there is no surrealist painting. So what happens? They published here Freud's essay in translation of Marie Bonaparte, Question de l'analyse pour le non-médecin. This is essay of profane psychoanalysis. Very important because Freud is answering to the polemic in Zurich with Pfister, who is put in question by real psychoanalyst, Swiss psychoanalyst, and this is a fellow Pfister. Is he really capable of bringing something to psychoanalysis? And Breton and Freud will try to, in a very didactical way, to justify also non-specialist psychoanalysis. And it's really, I think, characteristical for the surrealist approach that they choose this essay to publish in La Révolution Surréaliste in 27. In small note, Marie Bonaparte precised that this is a fragment from the book that she will issue. And I think Danielle we have 1,500 pages. This is the last chapter of unknown correspondence by Freud. This is Marie Bonaparte and Freud. It just issued. And there is no actually, either she's in Denmark, she's Princess of Greece and Denmark, or either she's in her modern life. She doesn't mention this translation, she doesn't mention Surrealist. In a preface, Rémy Amoury mentions exchange with André Breton. It's Congress of Washington. Maybe one day we will have it feedback, what Breton exchanged with her. But for a moment, for us, it's important that there is Freud, a real text by Freud in the Surrealist Review. And the review is published on 2 columns. They're imitating a review called Nature in France that is really scientifically oriented, and it's in 2 columns. What is interesting? You have reproductions of Giorgio de Chirico, reproductions of Exquisite Corpse. As you know, this is small papers I'm doing one part of a drawing, I'm passing to you, you're passing to him, and we are doing Exquisite Corp because it was the first title of a paper that they, in a collective game, they exchange, and it goes something like the exquisite corpse will drink the new wine. And the whole game, Exquisite Corpse, was called after this title, after this first paper that they made. So it's collective drawing. Here you have Dieu and the God and the man, and there is at least 4 of them not signed. And this is a game. It's public. It's the dream of Lautréamont. The poetry should be done by everybody, by all of us, not only one. So then comes another Exquisite Corpse, and Yves Tanguy that you see here. There is this number, this issue of Revolution Surrealist open. But what I wanted to show you is that there's 2 Exquisite Corpse. There's Giorgio de Chirico. So it's, I think, the unique time that Freud was illustrated by surrealists in this review. There is also text by Jean-François Wittmann. There is one about suicide and ideas of Breton, and later in the review, Surrealisme au service de la révolution. It changes, it's no more, they saw that they can't make revolution themselves, so they're changing the title. It would be Surrealism in the service of revolution. And there is also new essay of Freud's Wittmann about Freud. This contribution of Freud from 27 is strangely the one that gives Freud idea that he's something like saint patron of surrealists. And he will say this to Stefan Zweig in exchange about Salvador Dali. What didn't capture, it just some of the images just didn't want to take out. I don't have it here, but I will explain. This is publicity for Breton, Aragon, Benjamin Perret, Pierre Naville works in number 28, Revolution Surrealiste. In the middle of the page, its whole page is publicity, literary publicity. In the middle of the page, there is Aragon, Treatise of Style that I quoted to you. There is Pierre Naville, Revolutionary and Intellectuals. As you know, Pierre Naville, he was director. He's a member of the Communist Party. He takes the cash, all the money that they have for research of surrealism. He takes this to give to communists, and he's out of surrealist game. And now Breton will take the direction of Revolution Surrealiste, and painting will be admitted after Pierre Naville got out from the Revolution Surrealiste. But still, 28, Breton admired his work about intellectuals and revolution. Then there is André Breton, Nadia, we are in 28. There is Benjamin Perret, a book of poems called Le Grand Jeu, the big game, that comes from Kipling, and there will be a group of René de Mal, Roger Gilbert Lecomte, Moni de Bouly, Roman de Renéville, that will peg this title, Le Grand Jeu, and that will claim that big game is played just once in a life, and that will send to Breton a protest letter saying we don't have to be incorporated in the surrealist group. They are apart, but they have a common, with us, big game of surrealists. And these 4 titles are published by Nouvelle Revue Française. In 4 corners are titles of Freud. There is essays on the theory of sexuality, there is a souvenir of the childhood of Leonardo da Vinci, there is a dream and his interpretation, there is his autobiography. In 4 corners of the page and in the center of surrealism, which is, I mean, a real nucleus of how surrealists imagine that they are surrounded by Freud, maybe protected by him, until 32, when it comes to the conflict. This is a front page of Revolution Surrealist number 1, when Breton proposes surrealist moment with, strangely, this fish that is actually his symbol from solvable fish from mathematical writings. And when they opened this Bureau de Recherche Surrealiste, this was imagined something as a common place where people will come, leave their testimonies, conversate with surrealists, etc. In 80s, they published secret archives of this committee of surrealists, Pierre Naville, Louis Aragon, Benjamin Breton. They really imagine making revolution in France, making revolution something like Lenin did. Breton publishes Eloge of Trotsky's book of Lenin, and they're trying to do the secret committee of surrealism. This is why this Bureau of Surrealists kept a journal, and this is testimony of not so long-lived bureau that lasted for a few years. This is Vampire, a novel in pictures by one insane from Belgrade, Azai, that only Dibuli translated and that Breton wanted to present. I will not read you the description. This is, for example, here with the lady. Yeah, this is. He says, "This is my professor of French. As I'm imagining her, there is my face, how I'm imagining myself, etc." Breton and Eliard published in a journal called Le Feuille Libre, 3 pages from Prinzhorn from Austria. They published a testimony of creation of a madman. In Belgrade, they published in 25 the real texts of but with dislocated language of some of these madmen. And there was one writer that was called Rasko Petrovic, who is traveling to France, who is meeting Max Ernst, who is correspondence with Picasso. And this conversation with Chimera that Max Ernst presented as first memorable conversation. So nothing before that was done with Chimera, with hallucination, doesn't count. This is first one in 42. He is giving this as a present to Rasko Petrovic. They will find himself in exile in the States. I will present you later this point drawing that you have here in a original reproductions. It's 60 centimeters 30, and this Rasko Petrovic didn't come member of Surrealist group because he's having in 25 a judgment that actually what Surrealists are doing is to stay on the superficial level of language and trying to do automatical writing that is actually not profound, manifest contents of dream. And this is actually that will be the judgment of Freud. In 1932, Breton, with a picky, really picky taste, they're still in correspondence, they're tight, and he's remarking that there is Volkelt that is lacking in bibliography of interpretation of dreams. And Freud answers first. We are in December 42. Freud answers first. He says it's Otto that did the bibliography. It's for the second edition. It's my fault. It's not my fault. It's just omission. Then 2 days later, he writes another letter, and I'm quoting it just because it's interesting. Freud is saying, if it was anybody else who was telling me this, that I made specially because I was in bad terms with Volkelt, and I raised his name. If anybody would tell me this, and I would pass over. But since it's André Breton, I had to protest. I have to explain that it's Outrank, it's not me, etc. And Breton is writing a reply, and it's very strange because on one column you have Freud's letter, and on the left column you already have a reply of Breton as if preceding Freud's letter. And this is, I think, they're really in bad terms, because Breton is very picky there. He's saying, here he is Freud, because I remarked his omission, and omission is because he was in bad terms with Voltaire. Now he's saying that he doesn't understand surrealism, and now he's behaving as somebody, I punched you, and now you want to return to me. And this letter is first published in Surrealism au service de la Révolution #3, and then Breton publishes it in his Vase Communicant, so it gets a big publicity, and it's little like here I have a Freud's letter. There is also a facsimile at the end of this review. I have Freud's letter. Look at me, I'm in correspondence with Freud. But still, second interesting moment is Freud's explanation of his autobiographical reproach in interpretation of dreams. Breton is reproaching him that he didn't go very profoundly in his description of his own sexuality as a young man. And Breton answers in his letter that he put him enough in the front page of in the scene in interpretation of dream, and that he didn't want it to add more. And this is very interesting on the level, if you want, of Freud's own impression of how much he has to, how much he can say about himself in interpretation of dreams, and how much he's holding back. And nevertheless, even if Breton is reproaching him, at the end, Freud, it seems, has enough, and he says, listen, I'm in correspondence with you, your friends are sending me also books, and we can count with them, among them Eliard, we can count René Char, Vidartine, that is really experiment with onirical states. And still, I don't understand surrealism. Maybe it's because I'm very far from art. This is also mocking modesty by Freud, as you said, the way that he expressed himself, or the Leonardo da Vinci. But the letter is partly funny, partly it's amusing about the personal testimony of Freud in the correspondence with Breton 32. 5 years later, Breton starts again. There's inquiry about the dream, and he asked Freud to respond. And you have Freud's letter in 38 publication of Freud that is reissued in Daniela's article in the catalog of this exhibit. You have Freud's exhibit where finally he says, listen, I think that surrealists are doing with the just latent signification of dream, and what I'm doing, it's manifest signification that interests me, and there is no point, and I can't answer you about in an inquiry about dreams when I don't have concrete dream. And you know that he did in 23 with one French essayist who was doing about René Descartes a book, and still Freud accepted to interpret Descartes' dream about invention of a universal method, mathematical method, that Descartes thought could really exchange paradigm of sciences. But what the God will say, because if the man start doing sciences, it's all against the idea that God is holding everything. And Freud has this hallucination dream where he's afraid of God, actually. This is Freud's interpretation. And this is the only time that Freud interpreted one dream from the past, that he doesn't have a person in front of him on his analysis, but he accepted to do it. With Breton, he's saying that he can't do it. So, in between, we have dissensions from Surrealist moment, and Breton is suffering from the second Surrealist Manifesto 29 in last number of La Révolution Surréaliste, and book will appear year later. His ancient collaborators are leaving him, and it can be also compared with the sessions that Freud was experiencing. There is one example that Surrealists are commenting these dissensions in Freud group. This is still in Belgrade, in Surrealism Here and Today. There is Vanebor, who is correspondent of Salvador Dali, and he's answering to somebody in Zagreb Review who asked, Freud or Adler? And Belgrade Surrealists said, of course it's Freud, and individual psychoanalysis of Adler is just reduction of really invention of Freud. And this is interesting because this is not only Freud's didactical approach to psychoanalysis as in that text from Psychoanalysis and Profane Medicine. This is also following from inside the adventure of Freud's psychoanalysis and his adepts. With Breton, it happens also that they're leaving him. They're publishing an awful pamphlet called Un Cadavre that is actually reply to this exquisite corpse. Now Breton himself is exquisite corpse from Georges Bataille, from Desnos, from Pierre Neville, from Georges Raymond Dessaigne, ancient collaborators sometimes of Surrealist Revolution. And what happens then? Breton makes second manifesto of Surrealism, and he's asking a permanent occultation of Surrealism. He's now in the esoterical phases. There is no more adventure of Surrealism. There is no more this enthusiasm that was really bringing them to the what they were calling first period of dream state. And when he's accusing Georges Bataille, pops up the name of Freud. Georges Bataille is not only misunderstanding the historical materialism, because here is Breton. Now he's reading a new Soviet publication, and there's no more way to escape from dialectical materialism and from the Breton's new orientation of so-called social surrealism. He says in his second manifesto, as for Mr. Bataille's case, because Breton is making case of his ancient collaborators, and it is no news for anyone that we are witnessing an obnoxious return to old anti-dialectical materialism, which this time is trying to force its way graciously through Freud. And this is really not honestly Georges Bataille, who is trying to do with his study of Nietzsche and Freud a new position of intellectual French, at least intellectual, in the wake of the Second World War. And Breton is really in polemics with Bataille and his supposed misunderstanding of Freud, very wrong. What happens, at least? There is somebody new. There is Salvador Dali, and he will save. He's interpreting his name Salvador Salvator of painting, and he's coming with his really genius reproductions, paintings, drawings, essays. Breton publishes first presentation of Dali's individual exhibit in 29. And what happens actually? Dali changes the paradigm of this automatical writing that was supposed to be passive. You talk, you're a medium. This is a medium seance. This is entering of the spiritist game with Breton. Until then. And then Dali comes and says, my invention that I propose is, he's calling this a method of paranoical didactical association, and it's active, because you have to see not just one image, but few images in only one. You have to see as many images as you can, and this is really something different than passive method that Breton was proposing. Salvador Dali sends one text that is called Vive le Surrealisme, and again we are like long live Surrealism. Before, Aragon and Breton were saying long live Professor Scientific from Vienna. He sang Vive long live Surrealism 32, and second text that I published in this book in Paris 87 was answer to the inquiry on desire. And this is only inquiry that is coming outside of Paris Central of Surrealism. You have inquiry of love, you have inquiry of first important meeting in your life, and then this inquiry on desire. You have answers of Breton, Crevel, Eliard, that are very socially orientated, except of Dali, who is saying it's Marquis de Sade who should be educator of youngsters, and as for reality, me, I'm from a revenge of imagination to the reality, and he's actually quoting au-delà, beyond the pleasure of Freud, and he's returning the problem of reality and imagination that can be satisfied in the real life. Dali says the art actually should present, on the contrary, the imagination that should influence the real life. And this is his answer on desire that was published in 32. And strangely, I tell you just small history. In his exhibit in Centre Pompidou in Paris in 79, they tried to translate from Serbian into French his answer. And I asked the leader of Surrealist movement in Belgrade to give me the original, and we had the original that was published with approval of Dali. He didn't ask for $1 to be paid for the book. And strangely, in Vienna at the time, there was two correspondents from Avanguardia, from the journal, that had translated part of this text by Salvador Dali in Spanish. And this was first translation, first time that these texts were brought to the international knowledge. This is an original text of Dali's answer, but the manuscript is not his. He's writing really clumsy French. It's André Breton who asked René Crevel and Paul Eliard to correct Dali's manuscript. And what's funny, I'm showing you just this because there is one of the texts of Dali in Vive le Surrealisme where he's trying. The text is astonishing because we have first time parallel between Giorgio de Chirico and Werner Delft. You will see it later in the painting Narcissus that he will show to Freud. He's comparing lines of the speed of Werner van Delft and Giorgio de Chirico with the lines of the body of Gala. And when he starts saying, your body, Dala, your beautiful body, etc., Paul Eliard can't have anymore. Previously, Gala was with him, as she was with Max Ernst, now she's with Dali. So he stays with manuscript, and in the middle manuscript, there is René Crevel who takes over, and he's the one who writes again Gala, etc. This is the Dali episode, and this is, I think, the second important testimony of Surrealist engagement for Freud from somebody for second generation, because Dali is already presenting him in one of texts, somebody who wants to apply all the problems that Freud found in the human psyche. So sadism, perversion, all the things like this. Dali says, I want to present them in my painting. And this is strange because now, if you want, it's like an intellectual also transfer from psychoanalysis to drawing, but still the drawing is marvelous, and nobody can say that it doesn't work. For painting, it works, and maybe it works better than for the literature. So this is the painting, Metamorphosis of Narcissus. Up you have a sketch that is very different from the final version. Freud is in London, and Stefan Zweig that presented to him in Vienna Gilles Roman, that presented him a poet, Gilles Roman, French poet, that presented to him Romain Rolland, now takes a role presenting Salvador Dali. And in Correspondence, in July of 1937, between Zweig and Freud, you have the eulogy that Zweig makes of Dali. And there is one almost confidential book of Dali's archives where we have a letter of Stefan Zweig to Dali that we see that he really admired his painting. And he's begging Freud to accept the visit of Dali. This is whole caravan. There is Edward James, a rich patron of Dali and Messena, a London Messena, that Freud then says, this Edward James, he really needs analysis. But there is Stefan Zweig also that came with Dali, and they're explaining this as caravan because they're bringing this painting in small format. Dali either hallucinating, either wanted really to meet Freud in Vienna. Actually, he was coming to see Werner collection in museum, but in his autobiography he says, I wanted to see Freud. He just rings the bell. Of course, Freud is out of vacation, it's summertime, and Dali comes back to his hotel room and he's hallucinating Freud on the curtains. Freud is catching the curtains in the Dali's hotel room, and it's like interior model. This is really the formula that Breton tried to explain, actually, that surrealist painting can exist if it has an interior model. In a small room, in a curtain, there is Freud, and here there is Metamorphosis of Narcissus. Freud sees this painting, and it changes something in him. The title that I quoted, Surrealist, that Integral Madmans by Freud, this is from a letter to Stefan Zweig. After the meeting with Dali, Freud says in a letter, 20th August, 20th July, they just left, and he says to Zweig, I'm obliged that you brought me this fanatical Spaniard. Before, I thought that surrealists are something like 95% pure madmen, something like alcohol, pure alcohol, 95%. But when I saw him, I'm changing my mind. And it's interesting, if you want to compare the way that Freud talked about Leonardo da Vinci, there is also his modesty and his very, very clear distance of saying that psychoanalysis can explain the surrealist painting or the painting of the imagination world. But he says actually that it's interesting to try to do psychoanalysis method on paintings like this. So, who did it? It's Georges Bataille. In his review documents, he tried to do the analysis of this troublesome painting. The point that I want to show you in the middle, you see the Dales. It's coming from Werner Delft paintings, and the whole thing with situating Narcissus in the landscape comes also from the understanding that Salome had of Narcissus' myth. It's not only Narcissus looking himself at the water. What Salome suggested to see is also landscape around him, the wood, the grass, etc. And this is what Dali is doing here. Dali will describe this visit to Freud in his autobiography, as I told you, and later he will show that it's true. And surrealists are now going to exile in the Second World War. Actually, surrealist adventure, it's the end. Before embarking, they are in exile and they're waiting their visa for States, and they're making what they're calling now game from Marseille. They're making playing cards with new symbols, and they're inventing Freud. And I'm glad that we put to the catalog and the front page this card of Freud. That is actually presenting, together with Lautréamont and Lewis Carroll, it's presenting a black star. It's a understanding of persons. After Breton's explanation, it's a understanding, and it's a really the hunger of Freud to the knowledge. And then also there is a flame. Freud is bringing new revolution again, as Breton was noting in his notebooks, revolution will and blood. And I think that we have Madame Hoffman, that was a specialist in Marseille game, and that told you already some time ago about it. I will just finish with this symbol of Freud that stays in Europe. Now they're going to States, and among them there is Max Ernst, that will publish his écriture, his writings, with a small hieroglyphical symbols. This is one, as Dali, this is one of painters that has possibility, as André Breton also, that has possibility to express him in a literary way. And he makes this strange drawing poem that is called First Memorable Conversation with the Chimera, that you have here in this book, published in 1970, but you couldn't read. Nobody could read actually the small text, and text is very interesting. Since he gave it as a present to this old friend Ratko from Belgrade, I found it in the Belgrade Museum, and you have here reproduction in a whole format. This is published in a book in 91, and the text is, I conversed with the human arms, etc. And the text is interesting because this is, I think, solution that Max Ernst found. He's writing his text between the figures of the woman, like horses, chimeras that he's imagining them, and he's writing the text between. So I think finally we have this go-between, we have this intermediary realm that Freud was formulating in 1913, and intermediate realm that Breton was formulating in Soluble Fish. And Max Ernst found the way to present an automatical writing and automatical drawing together. And I think with this we can finish just saying that this go-between, and this will be my conclusion, this go-between of art, between reality and world of dreams, with the possibility that this one who started going in this madman house can return. This go-between of arts, if they can return, some of them, as Antonin Artaud, never return. If they can return, this is not the smallest thing that art can do. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. much, Branko Aleksić, for this very dense and vivid talk. I think it is a beautiful ending with the idea of Max Ernst bringing together the drawing and the association. And I would really like to invite you afterwards to have a look at this piece of work. And let me also tell you, because sometimes the pictures are very small, but if you haven't seen our exhibition yet, most of the magazines, the letters, the texts which were shown, you can find them in the exhibition, in the display cases. Also the sketch of Dali for the Metamorphosis of Nazis is since October on display. In
this is the new piece that you got.
This is the new piece we got by Helmut Kleban. Yeah. So I would like to open the discussion. Maybe there are some first questions, remarks. We do have a microphone. And who would like to start? Goodbye.
To adventure yourself to the realm.
Yeah.
I'm not sure it's working, but I might have a silly question. But while you were talking about the automatic writing, I was also thinking about the automatic college of data. And I wanted to ask if there is any similarity, or if there was anything that maybe Freud in his work were mentioning about Dada as well, or just a surrealism. Thank you.
Thank you for this question. This brings us back to this troublesome past of Breton that comes to interview Professor Freud. Actually, the hands-up wife did a doll, a marionette, with Freud Dr. Magicus, and it was showed for the first time in a Dada exhibit in Paris 2001 or 3. It was showed. She did a set of marionettes, and between them there was Freud.
So the wife of Jean Arp.
Yeah.
Okay.
For a moment it was Hannah Arp, or what was for a moment I'm missing her name. You remember her name? Somebody?
No.
This isn't just okay. This is a wife for Hansa, but okay, she's the one who put on the scene Freud and Dadaists. Strangely, because it was done in Switzerland, strangely they were more attracted to Jung than to Freud. And there is few allusions in Tristan Tzar's Correspondence. It's always Bertholdt's clinic and it's Jung, etc. And they are keeping little away from Freud. This is the Dadaist background of Breton, and if it could be actually background, because then what happened already with Dada is that was really negation of all art. Surrealist copied maybe in a Revolution Surrealist, in this Pierre Naville's text about there is no surrealist art, etc. You have similar position, questioning actually, is it possible to, for new movement, for new invention of surrealism, is it possible to do anything with a traditional art? And this is actually a tradition of Dada that they are taking. And this is profound also period of nihilism with Breton. And this is his interview with Professor Freud. He's coming from Tyrol, he's coming with visiting Tristan Tzara, Max Ernst, etc. And I think that they know that Breton, because he's writing to Freud, they know that he will meet him. We don't have, there is a correspondence between Tristan Tzara and Breton. We don't have testimonies that they discussed Freud. We don't have this, but it's for sure that they knew it, and that Breton maybe was even spurred by meeting Tristan Tzara for the first time in Tyrol, Max Ernst, that he was spurred coming to his wedding trip to Vienna to ask Freud to receive him.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So the wedding trip was with the colleagues, but you didn't. So and with his fiancée Simone Kahn.
Yeah, and she will have the Surrealist gallery. She will have Paul Klee, Picasso, etc. And in his letter, Simone Kahn Breton, in his letter with Denise Levy, who will become the wife of Pierre Naville. Mm-hmm. She's in Strasbourg. Denise Levy. Simone is in Paris, and they're exchanging, and it's a really madhouse because she's describing the surrealist sessions of the exquisite corpse of trying to do in collective way poetry or drawings, and there's really incidents when they put end of it was when Robert Desnos and Paul Eluard got really hostile, and Desnos was pursuing Eluard with a knife, and then Simone and Breton stopped this. But for some time, and she's writing to Denise, she says it's really crazy, the house. For some time, it took place in their own house, experimental, falling asleep, dream state, writing, etc. And what is interesting, Simone Kahn is the only woman. So there's transfer, there's all this man, concentration, sexuality on Simone, and she's not easy about writing about this. What happens then is in each collective game like this, there is promiscuity. Breton asked Max Maurice, one of these real surrealists, to accompany Simone to cinema, for example, while Breton is looking for adventure, looking to meet something marvelous at the street of Paris. And there is love affair between Max Maurice and Simone Breton. There is love affair between Breton and Nadia that Simone tolerates, but when Breton finds that Simone was with Max Maurice, he divorced from Simone. Yeah, this is it. And the whole thing, you see, it's also like it's surrealist adventure. There are texts, there are drawings, but there is the life really, and there is a split apart. And I had really bad polemics with the people who did Pleiad, and it's on net. They're treating bad Max Maurice, they're treating bad Gala, and this is people who never met Gala, who never met Max Maurice. They had their life. You can judge them in a bad way, really, but they're writing in commentary in Breton's collected works. They're making now really Max Maurice smaller than he had. It's really animosity with Gala Eluard. This Marguerite Breton can't stand her, etc. And I just answered to this, and they get really troubled with this. They answered me on 10 pages with the errors that they made in Pleiad and all this, and especially about this internal life, because all we are talking about, we are never forgetting that surrealism was in the life. And I didn't say, but the idea même of surrealism comes from Guillaume Apollinaire. When he wanted, it's not only the term, but it's idea. When Apollinaire wanted to explain how he understands the term of surrealism, this is capital. He said, this is a wheel that man invented. So how the wheel is working? For Apollinaire, it's actually our paces, it's legs, and you have paces of legs in the wheel, and it turns. And this is also image. And Apollinaire, as you know, is in the source is the Les Mamelles de Tirésia are in the source of Breton's inspiration. He has other terms. He had supernaturalism by Gérard de Nerval that comes from Swedenborg and Memorabilia, etc. And he will choose Guillaume Apollinaire with surrealism, giving him a new sense. What is the sense? Not only reality, but experiencing reality on a more intense degree, experiencing reality that becomes so hot, so hot that it becomes super reality. And few times he's using supernaturalism. And actually we made one colloquium in Paris just to explain the difference between supernaturalism and surrealism actually, and he opts at the end for the term of surrealism. But the idea is really that surrealist is in the life.
There is, yeah, maybe you take the microphone, please. Where is it? Yeah.
Thanks a lot for everything that you're saying. I was just wondering how about drugs, the use of drugs in this intensity of life that has to be experienced, or it was even as a wish to be experienced. Could you maybe comment on that also? And by the way, was not Guillaume Apollinaire also, like as an armist, also like one wounded soldier, also this experience, no, at some point?
He was wounded in the skull, And Giorgio De Chirico made this premonitional painting. This is really strange with wounded Apollinaire that happened. Your question is, it's touching a big part of surrealist experimentation also. There are two of them that we can examine. Antonin Artaud on one side and Henri Michaud on another. Henri Michaud is it's strange sometimes how young writers start their experience in animosity, in criticism of Freud, like in the sense, Freud, this is a merchandise of sexual affairs, etc. This is first text by Henri Michaud in the review Discovered in Belgian Review.
Which is also on display.
Displayed because Breton, not knowing Michaud's criticism, he answered. There is an inquiry about dreams of Franz Halens. Franz Halens, who is making a text, Melusine. This is a fairy tale, and Henri Michaud will try to do a few essays about Franz Halens, etc. But in correspondence with Franz Halens, he's taking under the knee, he's breaking the Freud's psychoanalysis, criticizing, and he's making his book on not so much on Freud as he has the idea that each invention actually takes from another field a form or a name. That, for example, psychoanalysis is taken from the sciences. That literary experiments by Proust are taking also from psychiatry, their experiences, etc. And Michaud writes this critical part of Freud before he's very poor. He's in Belgium. He tries to affirm him. He says to Franz Halens in one text, "Send me anybody, I will destroy him, I will write a harsh criticism and all this." And later he starts a drugs, but in a very sophisticated way, in a way that he believes that he can jot down his changing of perception and that will enlarge his perception. And he's doing these experiments with a drawing also and with the text. If you look the text, I don't know. I'm not impressed with his text because it's not. It's in between. It's not the whole thing, because if he just experimented, but in dosing the drugs, dosing the way that it should be, so that he's able to write and all this. All this is artificial. With Henri Michaud, I'm not sure, but it exists still. And another one. The real suffering, it's Antonin Artaud. And Antonin Artaud has psychiatrical troubles that they try to heal with the drugs at the time. And more he takes the morphium, maybe it's like a case with Nietzsche and so many of them. He starts to be addict and he can't do it otherwise. He can't get out of it. And text, destroying himself, the text of Antonin Artaud, as I told you, he has idea that actually he can overcome his psychical trouble, and he's writing actually to overcome it. He's not writing so much to show it. And with this correspondence with Jacques Rivière, who is editor of Nouvelle Revue of France, Jacques Rivière tells him, excuse me, but it's so incoherent, I just can't publish it. But if you explain in your letters how you're doing it and why you're doing it, maybe this would be more interesting. And what happens actually, you have a case of Artaud presented by Artaud himself to Jacques Rivière that is sometimes more interesting than his text that he wrote under the influence of drugs. And then the scandal of this electroshock healing with Antonin Artaud, and the scandal of Dr. Lacan, who thinks that Artaud is finished, that he will never write anymore. Changes actually after Second World War, when he doesn't have any more shocks, and where he tries to write, and he approaches sometimes with Dadaist experience that you evoked. There is like I don't know, whatever blab, Karabala Baraba. In the middle of text, he will do this 10 lines and 10 lines again and all this. But this is just excess, because the text actually are still understandable. The only thing that Artaud succeeded in is destroying this syntax. He's not imagining, and he's not doing the pretty text as Surrealists did. Antonin Artaud is doing really like a automatical writing sometimes with completely incoherent phrases and the grammatical sense and all this. And this is interesting. But in the second part of life, he's continuing drugs, and we see that the assistants like Paul Thévenet, who published 10 books of his completed works, she's bringing him in a hiding the drugs, and he's continuing, and this will destroy me at the end. But still, his text, it's something that you can't say that he's just a madman who wrote it. With Artaud, we have a real, I think, experience and succeeding writing. But after Second World War, this is really interesting. It's not in his first text when he's trying to explain. Now he doesn't explain anymore. There is no more conformism. Let's say the big word, really. There is no more literary conformism. He's not making the pretty text. And this is the real, I think, sometimes. Maybe it's not only thanks to the drugs, but much of it there is. And you're right to bring our attention to it.
Yes. Yeah, Amanda, please.
I just had really 2 points of clarification. I wanted to ask about the one person you mentioned who said that he was cheating at automatic writing. I missed who this was.
No, he's under control of Benjamin Perret. His name is Solomon Bully.
Okay.
He comes from Belgrade to France, and he finds that his grandfather was called Edidi the Bully. So he will take a noble particle de, and he will call himself Moni de Bully in Paris. You have his text in Grand Jeu, and you have this, what he is calling Surrealist exercise in number 5 of La Révolution Surrealiste, and it's illustrated by Picasso. So he's launched. Benjamin Perret, he gives another interview to Benjamin Perret for the review Commedia, and he's launched. It's only at the end of his life and memoirs that he's using the term really contraband, smuggling. And Benjamin Perret was supposed, he was sent by Breton, there in a cafe, and he was sent by Breton to control him. Now you will write the real surrealist text. And they take from at the time in Paris Cafe, you could command a paper and pencil from a garçon de café, and you write your automatical text. But this is the point. Automatical text, you can analyze it, you can find it in number 5, and you can see really when it's just quotation that he says, smuggling from my mind, he has proverbs, he has the fairy tales, and he's just making fragments, and then in between the fragments, maybe there is really automatical text, but still, he's smuggling the thing.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. So the second question is related. Did Freud ever respond to the idea of automatic writing himself? And maybe before you answer, I can say something about why I'm interested in it. In part, I was thinking about the phrase automatic writing and what exactly is implied by what's automatic. It seemed like in the talk, in some ways, it's in the title at least, it's automatic because it's related to free association. But I was thinking about Lacan's notion of touche and automaton, where the automaton is really a notion of repetition that he goes back to Aristotle to think about. So I was just curious, actually, I don't know if that relates to anything in this sort of great constellation of surrealists that you've laid out for us, but I was curious if you had anything that maybe would be helpful, really the role of repetition in automatic writing and how that plays with or helps us to think about this idea of what it means to cheat at automatic writing. But really the straightforward question is about if Freud said anything about automatic writing specifically.
In this correspondence with Marie Bonaparte, so there's 900 letters, 300 is from Freud, and the rest is from Marie Bonaparte. So she's the one who is really writing, but she's doing a work, and Freud lets her express herself. And one can see that she's sending him Proust. Mm-hmm. He doesn't like Proust. He says, and he's wrong. There, he's really wrong. I think that this is a part of what is a fashion today, and I think that Proust will not have a future, and he's really wrong there. He didn't like Proust. She's under influence of Proust, Marie Bonaparte, and she's really little silly. She says, I prepared to you one love of a swan's love. I prepared you, but 3 days I'm holding the book on my table because if I send you this, you will read Proust and you will not read me. And she wants to be the one, but then she says it's really I'm really wrong because I admire Proust and all this. So he's in touch. I think that nobody will ever after this correspondence will neglect Freud's information of a contemporary literature. He's reading Céline. She's sending him Louis Ferdinand Céline. Again, he doesn't like it. And it's very interesting what he says there. He says what he wants, he wants something, what he explains like a metaphysical sense of art. He wants something human. He wants answer of the human really experiences. And he said, this is so black and so without any background. I don't like Louis Ferdinand Céline. And so this is second one. Then
he has a copy of L'Immaculée Conception,
voilà.
Which is sent by Breton and.
I'm looking at his reaction of contemporary art. He's following, but about this that you asked, he doesn't answer. When he says to Breton, sorry, but I'm so far from art and I really don't understand the surrealism. I think that he's really considering as when Dali and Edward James came to see him, and he says they're really potential patients. I think this is the way that he looks. Did he look like this surrealism? Yes, because he said that until then, he considered them as a madman, and 95% pure madmen. So it must be that he got surrealist works. René Char, I don't know how he wrote, but this is really onirical work. René Char, his second generation, he comes at the time with Dali, and his art team, it's something like this mysterious lady by Robert Desnos, mysterious lady that André Bloch was dreaming in period of symbolism. William Butler Yeats was dreaming of her, but he situates her on the cemetery. So it's between dream state and appearance of a loved being, woman being. And this, I don't know how Freud reacted. Daniela thinks he found it in Freud's library, and you can see there with a nice.
We have it in our. It's now on display in the exhibition, but we only have about 20 books by Freud he owned, which came back to Vienna. And René Char Artin is one of these very few books with a beautiful dedication. I think he says with adoration to the grand Professor Freud, but it's just stunning that this book, he kept it and it came back to Vienna, and it's it's not it's a French book with the closed pages, and it's not opened, so
it's not cut.
It's not cut.
So what happens actually, I think that Breton had this exchange with Freud, but if Freud didn't understand them, at least he read them. That's sure that he was in touch. And with Char, I wanted to say something else, but I was letting you to the Artin. René Char did with Breton and Hilliard. They did, three of them did. It's called Stop. It's working. Ralentir travaux. Slow down. It's work. They did together a book. And I think that René Char had this really respect for Freud in maybe in spite of this exchange that was at the same time with Breton on the pages of the Surrealisme au service de la Révolution. One thing escaped me, maybe I will remember. I know that he read them, and then his impression was must be that it was ambiguous, But he never, I remember now, he never commented directly. What I wanted to say, we have the books that he kept, some of Breton's books, some of René Char, Eliard, etc., Dali, but the letter that first letter that Breton sent him, then maybe the letter from 37, etc., that Anna Balakian is quoting, we know that they existed. I suspect that at the moment of when he made what they called auto da fe, when he burned his papers going to exile, I'm afraid that some of the letters of Breton and that he didn't held as essential for his heritage, that he burned them just between the papers, that he didn't want that the Nazis get hold of them, that he burned them, because there is. We checked, there is no in Congress Library, there is no in Freud Museum in London, there is no this Breton first letter that would show that's really the same maybe enthusiasm that Char showed in his education. Because I think, let's go back really always to the sources, to the first reactions. And Breton's letter, if he says to Breton, this is the most touching letter that I got in my life, and that if Breton is quoting him in his interview with Professor Freud, since he's quoting the letter that Freud is inviting him for interview, I think that Breton is giving the real testimony. He couldn't invent that Freud told him. And it's really, I mean, if somebody says you this is the most touching letter, he got the letters. I mean, this is maybe the only testimony of Freud directly on. But what Breton could tell him is actually his notebooks. It's just enthusiasm for the invention of psychoanalysis, and still how he invented surrealism. You can't see from notes. You can't say when he had the idea and how he came to idea. But he's using the same word in Freud's correspondence. Freud says, I would revolutionize the word. And Breton is writing to Theodor Frankl, who is his friend, for medicine, and he will become also a writer. And he's saying, I'm holding the idea that will revolutionize the world, literary world, etc. But we don't know how he really came. He came with a help of, but what was the click? How he came to it? You can't say, nobody, and there is no document. This is very interesting, how he was pondering the thing, you see.
I think we will. No, please. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. I was wondering, when you were just saying, well, you know, Freud didn't like Proust and Freud didn't like CD,
Yeah.
and in a certain sense, the paradox, or what appears in also what you told us today, or what we see, is that basically Freud has a very conservative taste in art. That's not where he's very revolutionary, but actually the way that Freud arrives in France is through the artistic avant-garde. And that is so impressive, even because automatic writing, you don't know really, does it model itself? I mean, they have their experiments where they want it to be absolutely what it is, but of course it can't be that, and they know that. I mean, it's not, the smuggling is part of the fact that you want to interrupt consciousness, but of course it's only the interruptions that are possible. You can't just have, you know. But also it's modeled on the dream. So they have this, you know, I think it's Apollinaire, or I don't know, one of them says au travail when he sleeps. You know, so it's but I was wondering if you could say, so I really think that, and then the question of course would be, well, how does that enter into the way that Lacan receptions Freud, because you know, he really is part of the surrealist movement. He has this affair with Vittoria Ocampo and so on. And my question is also, you were saying about the little remark of Apollinaire about saying that the wheel is the first surrealist invention because it imitates walking. Yeah? And yeah, maybe could you say something about this? I mean, it seems to me that also what the surrealists are trying to do is to take some procedures, yeah, that they find in the interpretation of dreams.
You're completely right. My answer would be just to acknowledge your point of view, and there's Alain de Mijola, French historian of psychoanalysis, who made this association, History of Psychoanalysis, and who published first text there. There is 2 volumes of Dictionary of Psychoanalysis that appeared in France. They are translated in States. And there was Nicole Jableskova, a sister of Elizabeth that we quoted. And Elizabeth, since she was in control to Lacan, with Lacan, brought Nicole to interview Lacan. And this is the first text of Breton and Surrealist, and then Lacan and Surrealist, that appeared in this Dictionary of Psychoanalysis by André de Mijola. Himself, he made this history where he underlined exactly the role of Surrealist in popularizing, because the text like this in 27, but also whole corpus of text from first manifesto through the text actually brought Freud more familiarizing with the intellectual environment in France than did, for example, Marie Bonaparte when she translated Leonardo da Vinci. Because of the sexual problem, this was like she was almost excluded from the modern world. And here in Correspondence, it's very funny. You can see everybody was talking about scandal of translation of Leonardo da Vinci by Mario, but now you see that he's just a part of modern world. And even then, when she meet her, they're more quiet, they're more calm, and they accept her translation and Freud's interpretation. But with Surrealists, there was no such a problem, because Surrealists already situated them on this level of embracing Freud's psychoanalysis without this shameful, scandalous affair, etc. So this is interesting point of view that you're underlying. Yes, Surrealists were very, very, although he says in the first interview with Breton that they are late in France in accepting his pre-analysis, but then they are in the first row to bring him in, with their procedures, and the term is exact that this is really procedure that they took. Yeah, this is correct.
And did Breton read German? Do you know if he could read Freud non text in German?
No.
Because this is really, and I'm thankful that you mentioned it in the beginning, because when Breton was starting to contact Freud and write about him in his notebooks, he couldn't have read any single line written by Freud himself, because Freud hasn't been translated into French at this time. There was only this, as you called, vulgarized versions of psychoanalysis by Pierre Inard and
Flore Noir, and he's depending on them. But this is really interesting on the way, if there is something so clearly formulated as Freud's theory of sexual wish, unaccomplished, the dream. You have 3 or 4 pitch words, and maybe you can't interpret it wrong. Even reduced interpretation that he read was so clear that he completely embraced the theory. So he's quoting Flore Noir, Babinski, and whole experience of Salpêtrière with Charcot and all this. He's in touch, and he's reading them actually. And once interpretation of dream would be published in French translation in 25, he will have all these books, and he will file them with Freud's letter, etc. But this is really, when he comes up, even if he didn't have original, even with this, what he knew in French interpretation, it was clearly for him that it was revolutionizing the whole system of the thinking. This is interesting. So even things reduced, if they're not impossible to forge or to cheat, you see, in interpretation, even then they can have impact, and clear impact. This is really interesting. Yeah.
Okay. Is there a very, very last question? Otherwise, it's already rather late. No?
Somebody wants to ask me my personal work, personal impressions, personal automatic writing.
Maybe you can share something that you want to share.
That's a nice. Yeah, thank you for the question. Even if I provoked it. I met six of Serbian surrealists. 6 of them were still alive when I started writing. And one of them that really impressed me was, his name is Dimitri Dedinac. He's not translated in English. We translated him in French. And André Breton, that was also from second generation, just was getting really impressed by his poems. And this Dimitri Dedinac was in a house full of old people. He didn't have anybody. So I would meet him, and in 8 years, he was still experimenting with words of dream. And his solution was not automatical text, but he told me, where Paul Valéry stopped, he says, first word, and then how I will continue poem, etc. His answer was the words from the dream. And it's really, it's amazing. He has 8 years, and he continued. And he wanted to do the poem that starts from the words that he got in the dream. He couldn't continue whole poem like this, but he had this experience. This was amazing. Yeah, this was the person that amazed me the most. Then I met in Paris Pierre Neville, André Breton, Philippe Soupeau, and Gérard Legrand. Gérard Legrand from the third generation that helped to Breton to make magical art. That was experimental specialist also in Greek philosophy, pre-Socratic philosophy, Heraclitus. He had a book called Heraclitus, etc. And Philippe Soupeau, he broke with Breton, as you know, after Chamagnetic. He was one of them who just continued writing novels, like Aragon, and there is a split. But he had this maybe unique thing in his life, unique event. This was collaboration with Breton, and whole his life he would talk honestly about this. And it was still, I think, Daniela analyzed, this is still literature. Champ magnétique, Proust would call champ magnifique. He was making a pun of words, but they're not so magnific. It's still pretty. It's still a story. They couldn't, as you said, even if they interrupt inspiration and all this, interrupted the subconscious, they still make a still nice story. And I don't know how they experience. Subconsciously, they had to know that it's not the real thing. But still, well, Philippe Stoupeau will talk about the end of his life with this. André Breton, on the contrary, he helped us with French translation of surrealist poetry from Yugoslavia, and he was one of these really seductive men. He had a beautiful book of erotica events that was illustrated by Mata, etc. And Tyrion never practiced automatical writing. He would not talk to me about this, but he's on the what they call the left hand of surrealism. He commented Lenin's comments on Lenin's notes on Hegel's phenomenology that were really bringing Hegel inside the surrealist experiment. And the whole Surrealist Manifesto, second Surrealist Manifesto, that is esoterical. Now Breton is looking for the point when the dream and the reality will mingle and become one. And he's thinking that Hegel's point of view, where is reality and history with an absolute spirit, Geist, will become one. He's inspiring himself, and Tyrion was in a source of this Breton's inspiration with Hegel, etc. But nobody of surrealists, after the Second World War, nobody of surrealists experienced. Gérard Legrand wrote about magical art with Breton, etc. They would make a pun of words, and I will maybe finish with this. Pun of words would be again a collective work, etc. The one piece of paper would go around, and they did one. Will you open to? And now 3 points. To whom? Will you open if Freud knocks on your door? Breton says, yes, I would open. And there is Pontalis that you quoted. He says, aha, there is this surrealist game. Would you open to Breton? Yes. Breton is saying he would open to Breton, but Pontalis will open to Breton. He's very, very cunning. He says, I would take a Breton for a walk, and I would, because Breton was, he was a researcher of Paris, what they call insolved places. There is so many of them, and there is Place Dauphine that reminds him of sex of a woman, and it's a Pont Neuf, if you want. There is small inclination, and there is this place that is really beautiful with ancient archives and all this, and he wrote the whole text. So this is where Pontalis wants to go with Breton. And in this Soluble Fish, there is a dozen references to Paris places. And it's interesting about what stays in Breton's mind. So even when he's writing automatical text, it's places, it's dozens of places, but it would be impossible, if it's really automatical text, it would be impossible to name a dozen of them. In one, you could do it, you see, but not in many of them. Anyway, the wife of one surrealist that published my first poem, he's calling Dusan Matic. You have his poems in Surrealist Reviews. And she translated Manifesto in '64. So she gave me a present of this book, and I was 15 years, and I was very, very naive, and I said, Breton is saying this, I would do this, I would do that. So I did automatical text. And now, when I look like with problems that it arouses, again, I did a text. It is automatically, it is in the sense completely incoherent of images, but it has a syntax. And I would never, with the experience that you later have, you would never admit completely automatical text that is correctly written, that you don't have errors of the combination of time, past time, present time, and conjunction of words, etc. And it shook me. This is the only one that I did. I did the experiment on the other way. I did the experiment on Lyceum with one sheet of paper. I would ask my comrades from school, tell me the first thing that comes to your mind, and I was writing, and then it was posted in a hall of the school, and there was a professor of philosophy that was commenting this and all this, and we did really Dadaist experiment, but in a completely naive way, and it's really, really interesting the answers of my comrades. Now I have a son of 7 years old, and he tried in his class like this. He said he wanted to know from his friends, do you leave your in your meal, or when you have a meal, do you leave the best thing for the end or for the beginning? He tells me he asked two of them, and he comes to this Manon for the girl, and she says, it depends. It depends what is a desert. And he said he couldn't anymore. It depends for him. Will she leave if it's a cake or if it's a glass cream, ice cream, or all this? It depends what it is. So she started to, this is why. So as soon as you start to using a conscious, a logical way, I think surrealism stops.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for sharing this with us. Thank you for participating. I think we could stop here now because
it's time to stop.
It's time to stop.
Thank you for your question and for your assistance. I was very glad to share with you.
Thank you. Thank you, Branko, Aleksić.
Cheers.